In the autumn of 1993, in a quiet, high-desert town in eastern Oregon, a man walked out into the sage before sunrise with 2 cameras and a thermos of coffee, and he never came back. His name was Ray Kessler. He was 41 years old. He photographed wolves and hawks and things most people never see. And he loved his wife and his 12-year-old daughter more than he loved any of it. His truck was found the next morning on a 2-track road above Sage Inn Canyon, unlocked, the coffee still in the cup holder. There was no blood. There were no drag marks. There was no body. Ray Kessler vanished without a trace, and the case quickly went cold. 22 years later, one small detail reopened it. A single hairline scratch, no thicker than a hair, in the corner of a famous photograph hanging in a museum. And what that scratch led to was a truth no one was prepared for. If you're new here, take 1 second to hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel grow so we can keep telling these stories the way they deserve to be told. Now, let's get into today's case. Bellamy, Oregon sat in a shallow bowl of sagebrush and volcanic rock, about 90 miles from anything you'd call a city. 1,900 people, 1 grocery store, 1 school that held kindergarten through 12th grade, in the same brick building. In the winter, the wind came down off the rim and made the stop sign at Main and 3rd hum like a tuning fork. In the fall, the cottonwoods along the creek turned the color of a struck match, and the whole town smelled like juniper smoke, because everybody heated with juniper and everybody burned it green. Ray Kessler had lived there since he was 9 years old. He was a big man who moved quietly, 6'2", thick through the shoulders, with a sunburned neck and hands that were always cracked at the knuckles from cold mornings and developer chemicals. He wore the same canvas coat for 11 years and refused to replace it, even after Diane sewed the left pocket back on twice. He had a habit of humming while he worked, badly, in no particular key. The same 4 or 5 notes over and over until you either loved it or you left the room. He kept a peppermint in his cheek. Always. A green-wrapped one from a bag he bought by the pound at the feed store. When June was little, she could tell if her father had been in a room by whether it smelled faintly of peppermint and fixer. Ray was a wildlife photographer, not a famous one. He sold prints at the county fair, shot calendars for a regional bank, and every few years a magazine would buy something for $400, and he'd walk around the house grinning like he'd won a car. Mostly he worked mornings at the co-op loading feed sacks, then went out into the canyons in the afternoon light with a beat-up Nikon and a bag of expired film he'd bought cheap. He never used a blind if he could help it. He said blinds made you lazy. He'd rather lie flat in the rabbit brush for 6 hours with ants in his collar and get 1 honest frame. "You don't take a picture of an animal," he told June once, when she was 8 and bored and had asked why it took so long. "You wait until it decides you're not worth worrying about. Then it lets you." Diane Kessler worked at the Bellamy Branch Library, which was 1 room with a wood stove and 1,100 books. She was small and sharp and funny. With reading glasses, she was constantly losing on top of her own head. She had a rule that the porch light stayed on until every person who belonged in that house was inside it. Ray teased her about the electric bill for 17 years and never once asked her to stop. And then there was June. June Kessler was 12 in the fall of 1993. Skinny, sunburned, with her father's dark hair and her mother's way of narrowing her eyes when she thought you were exaggerating. She had a rock collection in a shoebox, a bad habit of chewing her sleeves, and an unshakable belief that her father was the most interesting man in the state of Oregon. He called her Junebug. She was allowed in the dark room, which was really just the back half of the mudroom, with a curtain and a red bulb, and it was the best privilege she had ever been given. She learned the smell of stop bath before she learned long division. She learned to hold a print by the edges. She learned that if you talked while he was counting seconds, he would count out loud in a ridiculous voice until she gave up and laughed. She also learned the sound of his shutter. 3 quick clicks. He almost never shot a single frame. Always 3. Click, click, click. She could pick it out from across a field. That was the family. A small house on Aspen Street with a bad roof and a good porch. A woman who kept the light on. A man who hummed off-key and smelled like peppermint. A girl who thought it would go on like that forever. For most of 1993, it did. The change started in the spring, and June only understood it much later, the way you only see a storm's shape after it's passed over you. In April, Ray came home from the canyons and didn't say anything at dinner. That was unusual. Ray talked. Ray told stories about a badger that had stared him down for 10 minutes, about a golden eagle that dropped a jackrabbit 40 feet from his head. But that night, he ate, and he washed his plate, and he went out to the mudroom and pulled the curtain. He stayed in there until after midnight. The next morning, he was gone before light, and he came back at dusk with red dust to his knees. In May, he started locking the darkroom. He had never locked the darkroom in his life. There wasn't even a proper lock. He screwed a hasp onto the door frame and hung a little brass padlock on it. And when June asked him about it, he ruffled her hair and said, "Chemicals, Junebug," which was a lie, and she knew it was a lie, because the chemicals had been in there for 4 years and nobody had cared. In June, he bought a topographic map at the hardware store in Preenville instead of the one in Bellamy. June only knew this because she was in the truck. She asked why they'd driven 50 miles for a map. "Because people talk," her father said. He said it lightly. He said it with a smile. But he said it looking at the road. Something felt wrong, really wrong. In July, the phone calls started. They came in the evening, usually between 8 and 9. Diane would answer, and there'd be a pause. And then Ray would take the receiver into the kitchen and stretch the cord around the corner as far as it would go. June could never hear the words. She could hear the shape of them. Short, flat, the way her father sounded when he was talking to a man he did not like and was trying very hard to be polite to. Once she heard him say, "It's not yours, Gordon." Once she heard him say, "You go out there and I'll know." And once the last week of August, with the windows open and the crickets going, she heard him say, in a voice she had never heard him use, "You come near my family, and I will end you." Then he hung up and stood in the kitchen with his hand still on the phone for a long time. Diane asked him about it that night. June heard that too, through the wall, both of them keeping their voices down and failing. "He's a photographer, Di. That's all. He's just a photographer." "You've been sleeping in your boots." "I haven't." "Ray, you've been sleeping in your boots." There was a long silence. "There's something out there," he said finally. "Something nobody's seen in this state in 60 years. And if the wrong person gets the coordinates, they'll be dead inside a month. Somebody'll put a rifle on them. Or a rancher will. Or a photographer will chase them off the country trying to make himself famous. I'm not..." He stopped. He started again. "I need it right. I need to do it right. And then I need to hand it to the right people. And until then, I'm not telling anybody. Not even you. Especially not you." "Why especially me?" "Because if you don't know it, you can't be made to say it." It didn't make sense. It just didn't. Not to a 12-year-old girl standing in a dark hallway with her heart going hard in her chest. Not to a wife who had known this man since they were 19. It would make sense later. It would make terrible, perfect sense later. There were other small things. He started double knotting his boots. He'd always done that, but now he did it twice over, checking. He started leaving a note on the kitchen table every single time he went out, with a time and a general direction, which he had never bothered with in his life. He bought a new climbing rope from a shop in Bend and coiled it on the truck's tailgate and looked at it for a long while before he put it in the back. And in early October, he did something June didn't understand until she was 34 years old. He came into her room on a Sunday night and sat on the end of her bed and asked for a picture of her. "You have about 900 pictures of me," she said. "A small one, wallet size, the school one." She dug it out of her desk. It was the 5th grade retake, the one where her bangs were crooked because she'd cut them herself. She hated it. "That one's ugly." "That one's my favorite," he said, and put it in his shirt pocket and buttoned the flap. 9 days later, he was gone. October 17th, 1993 was a Sunday. It had rained hard on Friday and again Saturday afternoon. The kind of cold desert rain that comes sideways and then quits like it never happened. And by Sunday morning, the air was scrubbed clean and so sharp it hurt to breathe deep. Ray got up at 4. Diane heard him in the kitchen, the tap running, the coffee going, the particular scrape of the cupboard door that never sat right. She heard him hum 4 notes, stop and start them again. She heard the mudroom curtain. She heard him lift the camera bag. You could always hear the bag. It clinked. It had a bad buckle. And she heard him at the door, sitting on the bench, tying his boots, double knot. Then again. She did not get up. She would think about that every day for the next 14 years. At the door, he stopped. He came back down the hall. He put his head into June's room, and June was mostly asleep. And she felt him put his hand flat on the top of her head for a second the way he did. "Bye, you ain't, Junebug." That was it. That was the last thing either of them ever said to the other. The note on the kitchen table said, "Sage hen, back by dark. Don't hold dinner if it's late, R." He took the truck, a 1986 Ford F-150, the color of dried mud. He took 2 camera bodies. The good Nikon F3 that had cost him 3 months of savings in 1985, and the old FM2 backup that had a dent in the prism from the time he'd dropped it off a hay trailer. He took film, a canteen, the green pocket notebook he wrote his frame notes in, and the 60-meter rope. He took the peppermints. He always took the peppermints. Dark came at 6:20. Diane made dinner and put a plate in the oven on low. By 8, she'd stopped pretending to read. By 10, she had called Ray's brother in Redmond, the co-op, and 2 friends who sometimes went out with him. At 11, she called the Halverson County Sheriff's Office and was told kindly that a grown man who photographed animals for a living being 4 hours late in the canyons was not yet an emergency, and to call back in the morning. She left the porch light on all night. She sat on the couch facing the window, and she did not sleep, and she did not turn it off. At 6:40 the next morning, a rancher named Fielding, moving cattle down off the Cottonwood Draw allotment, came around a bend on the 2-track and found Ray's truck parked on the flat above Sagehen Canyon. He knew the truck. Everybody knew the truck. He also knew immediately that something was wrong, and he could not have told you why. And later, at the inquest, he tried 3 times to explain it and gave up. Here is what they found. The truck was unlocked. The keys were in the ignition, turned to accessory, which meant the battery had run down overnight. The dome light was dead. The radio was dead. The driver's window was rolled halfway down. There was a thermos in the cup holder, half full, cold. There was a folded topographic map on the passenger seat with no marks on it at all. The tailgate was down, and on the passenger seat, sitting upright, was the camera bag. That was the detail that stopped everybody. Ray Kessler did not go anywhere without that bag. Not to the mailbox, not to church. Deputies who'd known him 20 years said the same thing in slightly different words. Ray wouldn't leave the bag. Diane said it. His brother said it. The man at the co-op said it. A 12-year-old girl said it in a hallway to a deputy who was crouching down to be at her eye level. He wouldn't leave the bag, June said. Ever. But the bag was there. And inside it, lenses, filters, a blower brush, 41 rolls of unexposed film, and the little chamois cloth he used on the front element. No cameras, no rope, no canteen, no notebook. He had taken the things a man takes when he intends to work, and he had left the thing a man carries when he intends to come back to the truck. His lucky lens cap, a chipped Nikon cap, with a bite out of the rim from the day a mule deer stepped on it, was on the dashboard, dead center, squared up to the edge like it had been placed there on purpose. And there was one more thing, which nobody could ever explain. The tailgate was down, and in the dust and rain crust on the tailgate there were 2 clean handprints, side by side, wide apart. Adult hands. As if someone had leaned on the truck, hard, with all their weight, for a long moment. The prints were smeared past usefulness by the time anyone thought to photograph them. Ray Kessler had walked into a canyon 8 miles long and 400 feet deep, in a county with more square miles than people, and vanished without a trace. The man who caught the case was an investigator named Walt Renner, and he was 53 years old and had exactly 7 years left before a pension he'd been counting down to since 1988. Renner was not a bad detective. That's important. He wasn't lazy and he wasn't corrupt, and he didn't decide anything in the first hour and then bend the case to fit it. He was a heavy, slow-talking man with a bad knee and a wife on dialysis. And he worked Ray Kessler's disappearance harder than he worked anything else that decade. He just had nothing. They put 22 people into Sage Hen Canyon on the first day, and 40 on the second. And on the third day, the Deschutes County Search and Rescue Team came over with 2 dog handlers. The dogs were the first strange thing. Both dogs picked up Ray's scent immediately at the truck. Both dogs took the same line northwest along the rim for about 600 yards, then down a break in the cap rock that was steep but walkable, onto a bench about 80 feet below the rim. And on that bench, both dogs stopped. Not lost the scent, not confused. They circled a flat slab of basalt about the size of a kitchen table, and they sat down, and they looked back at their handlers. One of the handlers, a woman named Cass Ivory, who had worked 40-some searches in the high desert, wrote in her report, "Subject scent terminates on the slab. No trail out in any direction. Dogs worked a 300-yard radius, twice, nothing. This is consistent with a subject who was removed from the location by vehicle, or a subject who did not leave the location on foot. There was no vehicle access to that bench. None. You could not get a horse down there. They searched below. They rappelled the pitch under the bench a 60-foot drop into a narrow slot where the canyon pinched down and the walls came together and the light only reached the bottom for about 2 hours a day. 2 deputies went down on the 5th day, walked the slot for 400 yards in both directions, and came back up and said there was nothing there but rock and old flood debris and a dead cow. They flew the canyon in a fixed wing. They flew it in a helicopter borrowed from the National Guard. They dragged the stock pond at the head of Cottonwood Draw. Nothing. And then the rains came again, hard. The last week of October, 2 inches in 11 hours, which in that country is a catastrophe, and Sage Hen Canyon ran wall to wall for a day and a half. And after that, Renner said, we weren't searching a crime scene anymore. We were searching a riverbed. So they went at it from the other side. They looked at Ray. The finances were clean and boring. $1,100 in savings, a truck payment, a mortgage that had 4 years left. No secret accounts, no sudden withdrawals, no life insurance beyond a small policy through the co-op. The marriage, by every account, was good. Not perfect, Diane admitted in an interview she found humiliating, that they'd fought about money in the spring and about his hours in the summer. But nobody in Bellamy had ever seen or heard a thing that suggested otherwise. There was no other woman. Renner looked hard. There wasn't. There was no note, no pattern of depression, no history of anything. He asked about enemies. Diane told him about the phone calls. She told him about Gordon. Renner ran it down. Gordon Ashby, 36, a photographer out of Sisters, Oregon. He'd published in a couple of the national magazines. He knew Ray. They'd met at a workshop in Bend in 1989 and had shot together a handful of times before something soured. Ashby came in voluntarily, sat down, and answered every question for 2 hours and 11 minutes. He was pleasant. He was open. He was, several people noted, extremely likable. Yes, he and Ray had a falling out. Over credit, he said, on a series of images from the Awihi. He'd assisted. Ray had published. His name hadn't appeared. It was petty, he said, and he was frankly embarrassed about how petty it had gotten. He'd called Ray a few times over the summer trying to patch it up, and Ray had been cold with him. And yes, at one point, he'd said some things he shouldn't have. Where was he on October 17th? He was in Elko, Nevada, at a nature photography symposium, where he had given a talk on Saturday the 16th at 4 in the afternoon. Renner checked it. The talk was real. 14 people confirmed Ashby gave it. There were photographs from it. He'd signed the hotel register on the 15th and checked out on the morning of the 18th. Elko is a 6-hour drive from Sage Hen Canyon. Renner stared at that gap for a long time. Saturday afternoon to Monday morning. It was possible. It was theoretically possible for a man to give a talk at 4, get in a car, drive all night, be on that rim before dawn on the 17th, and be back in a Nevada hotel lobby by Monday morning. But possible isn't evidence. Nobody saw Ashby's vehicle in Halverson County. Nobody could put him within 100 miles. There were no gas receipts, no toll roads, no cameras. This was 1993, in a part of the country where you could drive 4 hours and not pass a working payphone. And there was no body. There was no crime scene. There was, legally speaking, no crime at all. By March of 1994, the case was open in the sense that a folder existed. By 1996, it was in a box on a shelf in the basement of the courthouse in Halverson. And the box had Ray's name on the end in marker. And nobody opened it for 19 years. The case quickly went cold. There was one thing that never sat right with Walt Renner, and he mentioned it in his final summary. And then he mentioned it again to a reporter in 2001. And then he mentioned it a third time on his front porch in 2015 to a woman he almost didn't recognize. The lens cap. Squared up on the dash, centered, placed. That's not a man dropping something, Renner said. That's a man leaving something for you to find. I never could figure out what he thought it was going to tell us. Grief in a small town has a shape to it. For the first 2 weeks, the house on Aspen Street was full. Casseroles, coffee, men in canvas coats standing on the porch, not knowing what to do with their hands. Then it thinned. Then by Christmas, it was just the three of them. Except it wasn't three anymore, and that was the entire problem. Diane kept the porch light on. It was not a metaphor to her. It was a task. She replaced the bulb roughly every 4 months for 14 years, and she bought them in packs of 6, and she never once talked about why. The declaration of death came in 1998, 5 years on. Diane signed it because the bank required it to restructure the mortgage. She signed it in the lawyer's office in Halverson with her mouth in a straight line, and she came out to the car and put both hands on the steering wheel and did not start the engine for 20 minutes. June was 17 then. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. June left for Oregon State in 1999 and studied wildlife biology, which surprised nobody, and she was good at it. And she was also, everyone agreed, quietly not entirely present. She dated a kind man for 4 years and could not explain to him why she wouldn't move in. She took a job in Corvallis and left it. She took a job in Boise and left that too. She came home a lot, more than was healthy. She'd drive out to the Cottonwood Draw 2-track and park in the exact spot where the truck had been and sit there with the window down until the cold got into her. Diane got sick in the fall of 2006. Pancreatic. It went the way it goes. She died on March 2nd, 2007, in the house on Aspen Street, with June holding her left hand and her sister holding her right. Near the end, when the morphine had her drifting, she asked June twice to check that the porch light was on. June said it was, both times. The second time was a lie. It was 2 in the afternoon. The town said what towns say. They said she died of a broken heart, which is not a real medical thing and which was also, everybody understood, entirely accurate. June was 26. She buried her mother in the Bellamy Cemetery in a plot with 2 headstones, because Diane had bought both in 1999 and had the second one carved with Ray's name and his birth year and a blank space where the other date goes. The blank space is still blank in the photographs from that day. June stayed in Bellamy for 8 months, settling the house. And in that time, she did something she had been circling for 13 years. She opened the dark room. The brass padlock was still on the hasp. She had a key by then. It had been on Diane's ring the whole time, and neither of them had ever said a word about it. Inside, 4 years of dust, trays gone chalky, a safe light bulb that still worked, contact sheets clothes pinned to a wire, curled and brittle, boxes of negatives in glassine sleeves labeled in her father's blocky handwriting. Sage grouse lek 4/91, antelope cottonwood 8/92, badger den no good. And she found the thing that would matter 22 years later. And she did not know it, because there was no reason on earth to know it. She found a sleeve marked F3, gate scratch get fixed. She held the negatives up to the safe light. On every single frame, running down from the top edge in the upper right, was a fine white line about 1/3 of the way into the image, perfectly straight, perfectly consistent, in the same place on every frame from that camera body. She remembered it, suddenly and completely, the way you remember a smell. Her father in the summer of 1993, furious, holding a strip of film up to the light and saying a word he did not say in front of her. "There's a burr in the gate. It's scratching every frame I shoot. Can you fix it?" "Not out here. Have to send it to Portland. 6 weeks. He'd put the strip down. 6 weeks, Junebug. I don't have 6 weeks. So he'd kept shooting with it, scratched every frame. He'd told her he'd get it fixed in the winter. June put the sleeve back in the box and taped the box shut and put it in a storage unit in Redmond with everything else. and she paid $41 a month for that unit for the next 8 years and hardly ever opened it. Then she moved to Bend and got a job that fit her strangely well. Collections technician, later assistant curator, at the High Desert Heritage Museum. Cataloging, preservation, old photographs, mostly ranch archives, homestead albums, a lot of donated slide collections from the 1950s and 60s. She spent her working life with a loupe in her hand, looking very closely at small pieces of film, which is the only reason any of this ever came out. 22 years passed. In September of 2015, the High Desert Heritage Museum hosted a traveling retrospective. It was a big deal for a museum that size. 42 prints, 30 years of work, insured for a number that made the board nervous. Banners on the light poles downtown. A gala with a caterer. The show was called Wild Country, the photographs of Gordon Ashby. June knew, of course. She had known since the booking went through 8 months earlier. She had thought about it, and she had thought about it, and eventually she had decided the thing she'd been telling herself for 2 decades. That a man being a suspect for a week in 1993 didn't make him a murderer. That her father's investigator had cleared him. That Ashby had been 6 hours away in another state, and that she was not going to be the woman who let a ghost run her career. Gordon Ashby was, by 2015, close to a household name. 2 coffee table books, a PBS special, a named chair at a conservation institute. The Ashby Wildlands Trust had bought and protected 11,000 acres of high desert, and everybody in the state of Oregon thought he was a hero, because in most of the ways that could be measured, he was. And it had all started with one photograph, Last Light, Sagehen, 1994. You've seen images like it. A wolf, silver gray, standing on a rimrock ledge in horizontal red light, head turned, looking directly into the lens from about 40 feet. Behind her, out of focus, 2 more. It was the first photographic proof of wolves in Oregon in more than 50 years. It ran in 3 national magazines. It won a major international award in 1995. It changed policy. It was cited in hearings. It was on the cover of the recovery plan. It hung in the state capitol. It made Gordon Ashby's career in a single afternoon. June had seen that photograph 100 times in her life. On a poster in her college advisor's office, in a textbook, once badly reproduced, on a mug in a gift shop in Sisters, which she had put down and walked away from. She had never seen the original print. The crew hung the show on a Tuesday. June worked the install, because that's her job: cotton gloves, levels, condition reports. She logged 41 of the 42 prints without incident. Last Light, Sagehen was the last one out of the crate. It was a silver gelatin print, 40 by 50 inches, made from the original negative. She set it on the padded table under the raking light they used for condition inspection, and she leaned in with the loupe to check the surface for abrasions. And she stopped. Running down from the top edge in the upper right, about a third of the way into the frame, was a fine white line, perfectly straight. It ran through the red sky and stopped where the rimrock started, because the rimrock was black, and the line didn't show against black. June Kessler stood in a climate-controlled gallery in Bend, Oregon, with a loupe in her hand, and her blood ran cold. She did not say anything. That is the part she is proudest of later. She finished the condition report. She wrote minor emulsion abrasion, upper right, non-active in the notes, because that is what a scratch like that looks like to a conservator who isn't looking for anything. Then she went to the parking lot and sat in her car for 40 minutes. There are 100 ways to get a white line on a print. A hair in the enlarger, a scratch on the negative from bad handling, grit in a film squeegee, damage in processing, any of them. She knew that. She knew it professionally. She also knew that the line was straight and unbroken and in the same place, and that a scratch from handling wanders and a scratch from a burr in a camera's film gate does not, because the film is dragged past the same fixed point every single time. So the flaw lands in the same coordinate on frame after frame after frame. She drove to Redmond that night, to the storage unit she'd been paying for since 2007. She cut the tape on a box in the dark with her keys. She found the sleeve marked F3. Gate scratch get fixed. She took a negative out with her fingernails on the edges, and she held it up to the dome light of her car, and she looked at the fine white line coming down from the top edge in the upper right, a third of the way in. And she started shaking so hard she had to put it down. Something felt wrong. Really wrong. It didn't make sense. It just didn't, because Gordon Ashby had taken that wolf photograph in April of 1994, 6 months after her father disappeared. He'd said so 1,000 times. It was in his books. It was in the PBS special. He had described the morning in interviews, the cold, the weight, the way the light came. And it had come out of Ray Kessler's camera. June did not go to the police. Not at first. She went to work, because here is what she had. A hunch about a scratch. And here is what Gordon Ashby had. A foundation, a lawyer on retainer, and the goodwill of the entire conservation community of the Pacific Northwest. So she did the only thing she was actually qualified to do. She built a file. She started with Ashby's published work, which was easy, because it was everywhere. She checked out both of his books from 3 different library systems. She ordered back issues of magazines off the internet, 41 of them, and she paid for them on her own card and had them shipped to the museum so her boyfriend wouldn't ask. She laid them out on her kitchen table, and she went through them with a loop, page by page, image by image, for 11 weeks. She was looking for one thing. She found it in 93 photographs. The line appeared in Ashby's published work, starting in the spring of 1994. And running, she could date them by publication and by caption until roughly the autumn of 2002. After that, it stopped. Somewhere in 2002 or 2003, the camera body had either been serviced or retired. 9 years. 93 images with a hairline scratch coming down from the top edge, upper right, a third of the way in, including 7 of the 11 photographs that had made him famous. She built a spreadsheet. She measured. She used a millimeter scale, and she calculated the flaw's position as a percentage of frame width on scans, on her own father's negatives, and on every reproduction of Ashby's she could get her hands on. Her father's F3. The flaw sat at 68.1% of frame width from the left edge, descending 31% of frame height. Ashby's 1994 to 2002 work. 68.0 to 68.3%, descending 30 to 32%. That is not a coincidence. That is a fingerprint. In November, she went to Walt Renner. He was 75 and living in a manufactured home outside Prainville with an oxygen line and a beagle. He didn't recognize her on the porch. When she said her name, he sat down in his chair very suddenly, like his legs had gone. She showed him the spreadsheet. She showed him 2 prints she'd made herself. He looked at it for a long time with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a second pair on his nose. "You know what they'll say," he said finally. That he could have bought the camera. That he could have bought the camera. Estate sale, pawn shop, out of a magazine ad. Bodies moved around. He tapped the paper. You can't prove a man stole a picture by proving he owned the machine. He didn't buy it. It wasn't in the truck. It went into the canyon with my father. You can't prove that either. She sat there. Miss Kessler. Renner took the glasses off. I've had that lens cap in my head for 22 years. I'm not the man to tell you to let it go. He breathed for a second. The oxygen ticked. But you go at Gordon Ashby with a spreadsheet. He'll have you fired inside a month and sued inside 2. And then nobody in this state will ever look at a piece of paper you hand them again. You understand? You get one swing. Then what do? You find something that came out of that canyon, Renner said. That's the only thing that'll ever be worth a damn. June said the thing that everyone had said for 22 years. There's nothing in that canyon. They searched it for 11 days. They searched it for 11 days in 1993, Renner said. With the light wrong and the water high and their eyes full of what they expected to find. He looked out the window at a yard full of juniper. And it burned this summer. Whole cottonwood draw burned in August. June went home and looked up the fire. The cottonwood draw fire. Lightning start, August 9th, 2015. 19,000 acres. It had run up both sides of Sage Hen Canyon and cleaned it to mineral soil. The sage gone, the bitter brush gone, the mats of dead grass and drift that had covered the canyon floor since before she was born. All of it gone. For the first time since October 17th, 1993, you could see the ground. She went in on a Saturday in the second week of October, 22 years and change after her father walked in. She'd been on that bench a dozen times. She went down the caprock break the dogs had used. She stood on the flat basalt slab where 2 dogs had sat down and looked at their handlers. And then she did the thing nobody had done properly. Because in 1993, they'd done it in a hurry with a helicopter overhead. She went over the edge. She was not a climber. She'd hired a rope tech out of Bend named Sam Ojeda, who thought he was helping a museum lady photograph rock art, and who by the end of the day was very quiet. They went down the 60-foot pitch under the bench. Ojeda rigged it, and June went second. At the bottom, the slot was maybe 12 feet wide, floored with rounded cobble and now black ash. The walls came up on both sides, so the sky was a strip. It was about 15 degrees colder down there. They worked north for 2 hours and found nothing but a dead cow's bones and half a car tire. Then they worked south. 240 yards south, on the east wall about 9 feet up, there was a horizontal crack under an overhanging shelf, the kind of feature that in a normal year would be curtained by a hanging mat of dead cheatgrass and rabbit brush, and that in 1993 would have been invisible to a man on the canyon floor looking for a body. The fire had stripped it bare. Ojeda spotted it and said, "Hey, that's man-made, isn't it?" Because there was something in the crack that was too straight to be rock. He boosted her up. June Kessler put her hand into a crack in a canyon wall in eastern Oregon and pulled out a green steel ammunition can, the kind you buy at an Army surplus store for $8, closed and latched with the rubber gasket still holding. It weighed about 9 pounds. Wedged in behind it, jammed back into the dark, was a coil of climbing rope. She got it down to the canyon floor and set it on a rock and could not open it. Her hands wouldn't do it. Ojeda finally reached over, without saying anything, and flipped the latch for her. Inside, dry as the day it went in, a Nikon FM2 camera body with a dent in the prism, the film advance lever still out. A green pocket notebook, swollen slightly, the cover soft. A canteen, empty. 9 wrapped peppermints, and a wallet-sized school photograph of a girl with crooked bangs folded once down the middle. June sat down on the ash-black cobble of Sage Hen Canyon and made a sound that Sam Ojeda later described, on the stand, as the worst sound he'd ever heard a person make. The camera went to a lab in Portland run by a man named Hollis Vane, who had been processing film since 1971 and who was, at that point, one of about 4 people in the Pacific Northwest that anybody trusted with something like this. June drove it up herself. She did not let it out of her hands on the highway. Vane took the camera into a dark room and did not come out for 2 hours. When he did, he sat down across from her and said carefully, "There's a roll in it, 36 exposure. It's advanced to frame 36, so it was shot out. It's Tri-X. Can you develop it?" 22 years in a sealed can in a cold canyon is about the best case scenario for something this bad. He rubbed his face. "I'd say there's a real chance. There's also a real chance I pull out a strip of gray nothing. And if I get it wrong, there's no second try. Understand me. This is one attempt. Ever. Do it." He did it 4 days later, at reduced temperature, with a developer he mixed himself and a process he refused to explain to anyone. The Oregon State Police were in the room. So was a detective from the cold case unit named Nadia Coyle, who had been handed the file 11 days earlier and had come into it a skeptic and had stopped being one somewhere around June's spreadsheet. The negatives came up out of the tank. They were bad. Fogged, mottled, the shadows gone to mud. A bloom of chemical damage across one corner of the roll. They were also, unmistakably, readable. Frames 1 through 26 were wolves. Not the same wolves, the wolves. Same animals, same rimrock, same den complex. 26 frames of a silver-gray female and 2 others, from a distance of maybe 40 feet, in the low horizontal light of an October morning. Some of them were better than last light's sage hen. 2 of them were extraordinary. Every frame carried a fine white line coming down from the top edge, upper right, a third of the way in. The scratch was in the FM2 as well. Both bodies. June had been wrong about which camera the burr was in her father's backup, and he'd been shooting the good F3 clean, and he'd used the FM2 as a second body all through 1993 anyway, which is why the negatives in the darkroom carried the flaw. It did not matter. It made it worse for Gordon Ashby, because it meant the flaw that ran through 9 years of his celebrated work belonged to a camera body that had been sealed inside a steel can in a canyon wall since 1993, and to another body, its twin in that respect, that had gone into that canyon on Ray Kessler's shoulder and had come out in somebody's hands. Frame 27 was a photograph of a rope. Taken from below, looking up, the rope hanging down a 60-foot rock face and ending in the air about 30 feet above the camera. Ending in the air. Frames 28 through 31 were the canyon walls, shot in sequence, north, northeast, east, southeast, systematically, the way a man documents a place he cannot get out of. Frame 32 was taken at dusk. It shows the west rim of Sagehen Canyon from directly below. The sky is blown out. The rim is a black edge. And standing on that edge, small in the frame, is the silhouette of a man. He is not moving. His hands are at his sides. He is looking down. Nobody in that room said anything for a while. Frame 33 is a close-up. It is the end of a climbing rope. Held in the photographer's own left hand, you can see the crack in the knuckle with the camera in his right, focused at maybe 18 inches. The end of the rope is not frayed. It is not burst. It has not failed under load. It is cut. One clean angled slice through the sheath and the core, the kind you make with a sharp knife on a taut line. Detective Nadia Coyle leaned in and looked at it and said one word out loud, which was not a professional word. Frames 34 and 35 were dark and mostly ruined the canyon wall, an attempt at something, badly underexposed. Frame 36 is the last photograph Ray Kessler ever took. He propped a wallet-sized school portrait against a rock. He lit it, from the left, with a failing flashlight. He got down on the ground so the camera was level with it, and he made one exposure of his daughter's face. It is soft. The focus is a little off. The flashlight has burned out one side of it. It is a photograph of a 12-year-old girl with crooked bangs taken by a dying man at the bottom of a canyon, in the dark, from 4 feet away. That was the last photo. And it changed everything. June was told, repeatedly, not to do what she did next. Coyle told her. The district attorney's investigator told her. Renner told her over the phone with the oxygen ticking. Everybody told her that the case was now real, that it was moving, that there were warrants being drafted, and that the single most helpful thing she could do was go home and be quiet for 3 weeks. On December 4th, 2015, June Kessler drove to Sisters, Oregon, and knocked on Gordon Ashby's door. She has never fully explained why. The closest she's come is this: I wanted to see his face before he had a lawyer's face. He answered it himself. 61 years old, silver-haired, in a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled exactly 3 turns, holding a coffee cup, warm as a hearth. He had one of those faces that make strangers feel like they've been forgiven for something. Can I help you? My name is June Kessler. She watched it happen. She watched the name go into him and land. It took about 1.5 seconds, that's all. And then the warmth came right back up over it, like water closing. Ray's daughter. He set the cup down on the hall table. My God, come in. Please come in, it's freezing. I'll stay here. June, He put a hand on the door frame. He looked genuinely moved, and that was the thing she was least prepared for, and it made her want to be sick. I think about your dad. I do. We had a stupid quarrel, and I've regretted it for 20 years. He was better than me. I've said that in interviews. I know. I've read them. Has there been news? Did they find something? And June Kessler, who had spent 11 weeks with a loop and a spreadsheet, said the sentence she'd been building since September. There's a scratch, she said, in your wolves. He didn't move. Upper right. 68% of the way across the frame. It's in 93 of your published photographs between 1994 and 2002. And it comes from a burr in the film gate of a Nikon that belonged to my father. She kept her voice flat, because if she let it go up at all, she was going to lose it. You didn't take that picture. He took that picture 6 months before you said you did. There was a pause of about 4 seconds. Then Gordon Ashby's face did something she would try to describe for the rest of her life and never quite manage. It didn't get angry. It didn't get frightened. It got tired. For 1 second, standing in his own doorway in a nice flannel shirt, he looked at her like a man who had been carrying something up a hill for 22 years and had just been told he was almost at the top. Then it was gone, and he said pleasantly, "You need to leave my property." Was he alive when you got down there? You need to leave my property. And you need to understand that I'm going to call my attorney the moment you're off it. And I'm going to call your employer tomorrow. His voice never rose. That was the worst part. You're a sick young woman, and I'm very sorry for you. And I will bury you. He photographed you, June said. And Gordon Ashby stopped with his hand on the door. Frame 32, she said. You stood on that rim for a long time. Long enough for him to get the camera up. He got you. Ashby closed the door. He did call his attorney. He also called the museum and the board, and by the following Tuesday, June had been placed on administrative leave, pending review of conduct unbecoming an institutional representative. And there was a cease and desist letter in her mailbox with a number in it that would have taken her 9 years to earn. It didn't matter. It was already too late for him, and he didn't know it, because the notebook was in a conservation lab in Eugene, and it had been there for 6 weeks, and it was almost ready. The green pocket notebook had gotten damp exactly once, probably from condensation inside the can during a temperature swing, and its last 11 pages had fused into a single block. A paper conservator named Yolanda Saris spent 41 days separating them with a humidity chamber, a spatula thinner than a fingernail, and the kind of patience that most people cannot imagine. The first 2/3 of the notebook is exactly what it looks like, a working photographer's field log. Frame numbers, light readings, wind, notes like she came out 6:52, fed pups, gone by 7:20, and too much shadow on the left. Try tomorrow from the ledge. He'd found the den on April 4th, 1993. He'd gone back 41 times. And then the entries change. October 16th. G called the house again Thursday. Diane picked up. He asked her if I was going out this weekend. He asked her what time. I want that written down somewhere. October 17th, 5:55 a.m. On the bench. Cold, clear after the rain, air's good. Going down at first light to the lower ledge. It's the last decent light before the pups disperse. 28 frames on the f3 already, want the low angle. October 17th, 7:40 a.m. Got it, got all of it. She came within 40 feet and she looked at me, and she did not care. Best morning of my life. Junebug would have lost her mind. October 17th, 11:20 a.m. Rope's gone. That's the whole entry. 3 words and the time. October 17th, 1 p.m. Have been up and down this slot 400 yards both directions. There's no way out. North it pinches to nothing. South it goes maybe 1.5 miles to the cattle trail, but there's 2 dry falls I can't climb. 20 feet and 30 feet. Went off the last 4 feet of the rope when it came loose. Right ankle is broken. I can hear it grinding. Have splinted with the tripod legs and a shirt. Rope end is cut clean. Somebody cut my rope. October 17th, 4 p.m. I keep thinking there's a version of this where it's a mistake. There isn't. Nobody cuts a fixed line by accident. Canteen is about 2/3. There are pools from the rain, but they're in the ash and cow muck. I'll drink them tomorrow. October 17th, dusk. He came to the rim, stood there maybe 40 minutes. I yelled until my voice went. He didn't move and he didn't answer. I got the camera up and shot him. He knows I'm here. He was making sure. October 18th, cold night, very cold. Second night will be worse. I want to write down what this is about because if somebody finds this and it isn't Diane, they won't understand it. There are wolves in Sagehen Canyon. 3 at least. 1 female denning, 2 younger. First in this state since the 30s. I found them in April. I have not told the Fish and Wildlife, and I have not told the paper, and I have not told my wife. And here is why. The last time something like this happened in this county, in '78, with the last of the pronghorn on the Hollis place, somebody put a spotlight on them inside of a month. People are not ready, and a photographer with a name to make will burn a den site to the ground getting his frame. I was going to give it 3 seasons, get the pups on film, get it airtight, then hand the whole thing to the biologists and let them decide what the public gets told and where and when. Gordon wanted the coordinates. He's wanted them since June. He said we'd publish together. He said I was sitting on the biggest wildlife story in the American West. and that I was a coward and a hobbyist, and that I'd wasted it. Maybe he's right about the second part. He's not right about the first. October 18th later. Ankle is bad. Can't put weight. Slept maybe an hour. Junebug, if this is you reading this. And I think it will be, because you're the one who finishes things. I am not lost. I want you to know that specifically, because I know what they're going to tell you. They're going to tell you I wandered off. They will tell your mother I got careless. Do not let them say I got careless. I was not careless a day in my life out here. I'm exactly where I meant to be. Somebody else made a decision. October 19th. He came down. That's 4 pages of nothing. And then that line, in handwriting that has gone loose and enormous. October 19th continued. He came around by the cattle trail from the south, which takes most of a day on foot. So he planned it. He went home, and he thought about it, and he came back. He stood 8 feet from me. I asked him for water. I had my hand out. He took the F3 and both exposed rolls out of my pack, and he put them in his coat, and he checked the numbers on the canisters, and he put them in his coat. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Ray." He said it like he meant it. That's the part I can't get past. I think he actually meant it. Then he walked back down the canyon the way he came. He left me the FM2 because he didn't know there was a roll in it. He didn't check it. He was in a hurry, and he didn't check the backup. October 19th. Night. Hid the can in the crack under the shelf, 9 feet up, standing on the round boulder. Took me an hour and a half on one leg. Anything on the floor goes in the first flood. This canyon runs wall to wall. I've seen the drift lines. The crack is above the highest one. Camera's in it. Notebook goes in when I'm done writing. Junebug's picture is in it. I shot a frame of it tonight. Last one on the roll. So if the picture goes, the frame is still there. If you have this, then it worked. And I'm not sorry about very much. Diane, turn off the porch light. Please. Turn it off and go to bed. Junebug, it wasn't for a picture. Tell them that. It wasn't ever for a picture. The wolves are 1.4 miles NNE of the bench, in the Second Side Canyon, east wall, under the black Rimrock band. Don't give that to a magazine. Give it to somebody with a badge and a conscience, and let them sit on it. I've had a good life. I had a very good life. The last legible words in the green notebook are not a sentence. They are 4 notes of music, written out badly on a staff he drew himself, freehand, crooked. June recognized them immediately. It was the thing he hummed. The Oregon State Police went back into Sagehen Canyon on April 12, 2016, with an anthropology team from the university and 11 volunteers. They found him in 9 days. He was 61 yards south of the crack, under about 4 feet of flood cobble at the outside of a bend, in the place the water would naturally have put him. The fire and 2 winters of runoff had moved the surface enough to expose a fragment of the canvas coat with the pocket Diane had sewn on twice. The remains were identified by dental records and confirmed by DNA. The right tibia and fibula showed a spiral fracture with no sign of healing. There were 9 peppermint wrappers in the debris around him, and a chipped Nikon lens cap was never found because it was in an evidence box in Halverson, where it had been since 1993, squared up on a dashboard by a man who wanted somebody to notice that his camera bag was in the truck and his cameras were not. Gordon Ashby was arrested at his home in Sisters on May 3, 2016. He did not resist. He asked if he could put on a different shirt. The prosecution's case was built on 4 things, and only one of them was a photograph. The first was the scratch. 93 published images across 9 years, matched to a camera body recovered from a sealed can in a canyon wall, corroborated by an FBI photographic examiner who put the flaw's position at a 68.1% frame coordinate, with a tolerance the defense could not shake. The second was the rope, both ends. The cut end from the ammo can, and the anchored end, still tied to a stunted juniper on the rim. Recovered in 1993 by nobody at all, because nobody in 1993 had thought to look for an anchor found in 2016 by a state trooper in about 11 minutes. Weathered to gray, with a matching angled cut through sheath and core. The third was the shadow. Frame 32 showed a man on the rim at dusk. It did not show his face, but it showed his shadow, thrown long and east across the caprock behind him by the setting sun. And a forensic imaging specialist named Dr. Adaeze Nkemelu was able to calculate, from the shadow's angle and the known geometry of the rim, the position of the sun to within about half a degree, which gave a date and a time. October 17th, 1993, at 6:11 p.m., give or take 9 minutes. It also gave a height. The figure on that rim was between 5'10" and 6'1". Gordon Ashby is 5'11". And the fourth thing, the thing the jury talked about most, afterward came out of Gordon Ashby's own filing cabinet. He was a meticulous man. He had kept every business record he had ever generated in labeled boxes in a climate-controlled room off his studio, because he had always intended to donate his papers to an institution someday. In the box marked 1993 was a fuel receipt from a station in Burns, Oregon, dated October 19, 1993, at 5:52 a.m. Burns is 2 hours from the south end of Sage Hen Canyon. It is 400 miles from Elko, Nevada, where he had told Walt Renner in 1993 that he had spent that entire week. He had kept it for 23 years because he kept everything. He had filed the receipt that hanged him with his own hands, and then he had made a career out of never once looking in that box. The trial ran 11 days in the fall of 2017. He did not testify. The defense argued that Ray Kessler had fallen, that the rope had been cut afterward by an unknown party, that Ashby had been in the region on a scouting trip and had discovered the den independently, that a camera body can change hands, that a shadow is not a face. The jury was out for 6 hours and 40 minutes. Aggravated murder. Guilty. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He was 63 years old. Within 4 months, the International Award for Last Light. Sage Hen was rescinded. His publishers pulled both books. The Institute stripped his name off the chair. The Ashby Wildlands Trust changed its name, kept its land, and issued a 2-paragraph statement. And quietly, over about 18 months, a group of editors and archivists did something that had never been done at that scale before. They went back through 93 photographs and recredited them. Every one of them now carries the same line. Photograph by Ray Kessler, 1952 to 1993. June was consulted on the release of the wolf frames. She had one condition, and she fought the state over it for 4 months and won. The coordinates in the notebook were sealed, and the images were published without location data of any kind. By then, it hardly mattered. The den had been empty since 1994. Wolves had come back to Oregon on their own, the long way, 12 years later. And nobody had needed a photograph to prove it. But she did it anyway, because he asked her to. They buried Ray Kessler on October 17, 2017. 24 years to the day, in the Bellamy Cemetery, beside Diane, in the plot she had bought in 1999. The stonecutter came out that November and filled in the blank space. There were about 200 people at the service, which is more than Bellamy has for most things. Sam Ojeda came, Hollis Vane drove down from Portland. Detective Nadia Coyle stood at the back in the only dress anyone at her office had ever seen her wear. Walt Renner came in a wheelchair with an oxygen tank strapped to the back of it. And when June came over to him, he took her hand in both of his and held it and could not talk for a while. 22 years I had that lens cap, he finally said. You told me what to do, June said. You told me to find something that came out of the canyon. He shook his head slowly. He told you. Man set the whole thing up on one leg in the dark. All I ever did was fail to notice for 2 decades. You noticed, she said. You just noticed the wrong thing first. Everybody does. June spoke last at the service. She had written 6 pages and used none of them. She said her father hummed. She said he smelled like peppermint and darkroom fixer. She said he double-knotted his boots and put a hand flat on the top of her head and called her Junebug and told her once, when she was 8 and impatient, that you don't take a picture of an animal. You wait until it decides you're not worth worrying about. Then she said the things she had come to say. For 22 years, people in this town were kind to me, and they were kind in a particular way, and I want to name it. They were kind the way you're kind to the family of a man who might have walked off. Nobody ever said it. Everybody thought about it. And I want to say out loud, one time in front of all of you, he was down there. He was 2 miles from this church, and he was awake for 3 days. And the last thing he did with his own 2 hands was climb a boulder on a broken leg to put a steel box where the water couldn't reach it, because he thought I might come. She stopped for a second. He was right. She kept the photograph. The state gave it back to her in 2018. The actual wallet-sized print, folded once down the middle, 5th grade retake, crooked bangs. It's in a frame on a shelf in her house in Bend. Next to it is the last photograph Ray Kessler ever made, frame 36, printed at 8 by 10, soft and underexposed and burned out on one side. It's the same picture, twice. One a girl gave to her father, one a father made of a girl, in the dark, at the bottom of the world, because he wanted the last thing on the roll to be her face. June turned the porch light off at the house on Aspen Street before she sold it. She stood in the yard for a while first. Then she reached in and flipped the switch and shut the door. We tell ourselves that the people who vanish have chosen it. It's easier that way. It's easier to believe a man walked off into the sagebrush and started over than to believe he was 3 days dying 2 miles from his own kitchen table while a town went about its business above him. But the ones who disappear are not always running away. Sometimes they are standing exactly where they meant to stand, doing the thing they believed in, until someone else makes a decision in 90 seconds that costs them everything. Ray Kessler could have handed over a set of coordinates and gone home to dinner. He didn't. He protected 3 animals that no one else even knew existed from a man who wanted to be famous, and it killed him. And it took 22 years and a wildfire and a daughter with a loop in her hand for anybody to know it. Gordon Ashby got the picture. He got the prize, the books, the chair, the 11,000 acres, the whole shining life. He just couldn't get rid of a scratch the width of a hair. That's the thing about the truth. It doesn't argue. It doesn't hurry. It sits in a steel can in a crack in a canyon wall for 2 decades, above the flood line, waiting for the country to burn away so somebody can finally see it. And it was never really the wolves that saved him in the end. It was a folded school photograph in a shirt pocket, and a girl who finished things, and a man who spent his last hour of daylight making sure the final frame was her. In the end, love proved stronger than the darkness. It usually does. It just takes longer than we can stand. If this story stayed with you, hit like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments what you would have done in June's place, standing in that gallery with a loop in your hand. We'll see you in the next one.